Because tonight we just want to talk about wonder and being in the presence of God and reminding ourselves who God is, what this God is, who this God is that we are worshiping. So when we look up into the starry sky, we're only seeing something like 0.000003% of what's out there. And what we know is out there, because they call, there's the universe and then there's the observable universe, which is what we know exists. In fact, 90% of the Milky Way galaxy is invisible. So our own galaxy, which remember how small that looks compared to everything else, 90% of that you can't see when you're looking at. According to the best estimates of astronomers, 275 million, okay, get this thought in your head, 275 million new stars are born every single day. 275 million new stars were born today in the universe. It's estimated that there are more stars in the universe than grains of sand on every seashore on this planet. So every tiny little grain of sand on every single beach, there are more stars than that out there. 10 billion trillion stars in the universe. Show me that number, because I had to kind of keep making it smaller and smaller. This is what 10 trillion billion stars looks like. That's how many stars they think. Now, who knows, but that's how many stars, like our sun. And, we've got planets that orbit our sun that we live on one of, okay? So just let your brain go crazy for a second to think about that picture down there is what we think, what they think the universe looks like. Not like the spirally thing was our Milky Way. That was our galaxy. But who really knows? I mean, they keep discovering things that are crazy, wacky, okay? For example, there is this large quasar field, all right? So quasars have something to do with black holes. If you know what that's about, then sorry. I will butcher it. But I did, it's like Wikipedia and everything. So something to do with black holes. And the groups of quasars that form, they think, are probably the largest astronomical structures out there. So they kind of come together and form these structures together. The largest one, now they thought, according to quantum physics, which has rules, okay? It's not just like, oh, this is big and that's bigger. Cool. It's like there are rules to how everything works, that as they go further and further out in the universe, they are like, okay, we got to test this against the quantum physics rules that we've discovered mathematically and physically that work. It has been believed that no structure could be more than 1.2 billion light years across and actually stay together. They just found a quasar field, the largest one they've ever found, that's 4 billion light years across, which literally does not make sense according to what we think we know, okay? So I think they're kind of like, hey, just stick that one over there. Like, we'll get to that one later. We're not really sure how any of this actually works. 4 billion light years across. Let me just remind you what that means. If you were traveling at the speed of light, which is fast, all right, it would take you 4 billion years to get across from one side to the other of this quasar field. Unbelievable, right? Now, this is all outside of anything that we will ever probably be able to see from this planet. There could be anywhere up to 400 billion stars in the Milky Way galaxy. Remember, we're just talking about the Milky Way. That's our galaxy. 400 billion stars. Think about that for a second. And up to 50 billion planets. 50 billion planets. Like we're on a planet. So like ours would be one. And then there's a bunch more, right? That would equal 50 billion. If even 1% of those are in their system's Goldilocks zones. Now, the Goldilocks zone is the habitable zone around a star where the temperature is just right, not too hot, not too cold, for there to be liquid water. We are in the Goldilocks zone of our star, right, our sun, because we're able to sustain life. So if you look at these 50 billion stars that may be out there, and even 1%, so scatter 100 planets around, and only even 1% of those are in this Goldilocks zone, then that means, if that were possible, this is just a speculation, 500 million planets in our galaxy alone could be capable of supporting life. 500 million planets. If they were in that, now if, there are a bunch of ifs, they're just kind of sticking out numbers. 500 million planets just in our galaxy. And you saw our galaxy compared to the big one, the really big yellow one that was up there. I mean, oh my gosh, this just is mind-boggling to me what is actually out there. Until you start watching YouTube videos, and most of them are scientific, but some of them are not, okay? So just stick with National Geographic for a while. Because I had been almost doing nothing but this. I just cannot get enough of learning about like planets, like the planet that's made of burning ice. Literally, it's made of burning ice. It doesn't make sense to anybody. They can't figure out how this ice doesn't melt at like 400 plus degrees Celsius surface temperature of this planet, and yet it's ice that's I mean, it's just wild. Like, nobody knows, and nobody probably ever will. Maybe if we live like thousands of years longer and we're able to continue at the rate that we have in scientific exploration. But, I mean, just let it kind of sink in how big things are. We like to say, like, I'm not the center of the planet. I'm not the center of the world. I'm like, we're not the center of anything. I mean, think about how tiny the little portion that they showed you from the Hubble telescope, where it was like 400 billion, and it was like so many thousands of galaxies like our Milky Way, could be seen within there with like billions of stars. And then it showed you the tiny little square, the patch of sky that they actually took that from. It's like they turned the telescope and they're like, let's look what's there, Another video that I was watching, a guy held up his finger with a grain of sand on it. He held it up to the sky, and he said, the portion of the sky that we can see around us, the universe around us that we can see, that was photographed by the Hubble telescope is about what's blocked out by this grain of sand. I mean, seriously, I don't know. We don't know. Like, I'm not trying to creep us out and be like all UFO-y and, stuff like that, but I'm just saying. I mean, think about it for a second. Like, we are, and then think about what you did today. What you ate for dinner. What were the things that got you down? How irritated you might have been working through your deal, dealing with your kids, or, dealing with coworkers, or, oh my goodness, where's Erica? Starbucks, oh my goodness, yeah. I walked in there and I was like, hang in there to every employee. It's like, you're doing great. I mean, they ordered an Americano, but without the water. The girl was like, it's just shots over ice. Just next time, anyway. I was just like, I know, I feel you, baby. You can hang in there. These are the things that we think of throughout our day. I don't really go throughout my day thinking of things like that. I don't know about you. But I'm starting to think maybe I should. Because God is the God of all that. It's like, we got the whole world in his hands. The song? It's like, he's got a lot more than our whole world in his hands, right? He's got a lot more to think about and do and worry about than like whether the scarf that I liked at the outlet went on sale today so that I can snag it. And you know what I'm saying? Like the things that we think about and pray about. Amazingly, he actually cares. But I think it means a lot more to me now that I consider the fact that God, who's the God of all that, cares. I mean, sometimes we just need to be reminded of how big God is, and we need to be reminded of wonder. We just need to stand in wonder of God, in awe, shut our mouths, knowing that our words cannot ever describe him. We can do our best. I mean, that first song that we sang, our God is greater, our God is stronger, awesome in power. Oh, yeah. You know what I'm saying? Created that picture that we saw of the universe just by speaking. Just kind of does whatever he wants because he's got power over all of it. It's absolutely unbelievable. And when we look at all these things and we talk about the billions of stars and the crazy things that are out there, and I could have gone the other direction. We could have talked about atoms, and our brains. Like one of the most complex things they've ever discovered in the universe, a human brain so far, who knows what other brains are out there, but ours is so far the most. I mean, we could have gone a lot of different directions to see how incredibly amazing God is. And we're only talking about so far his creation. We haven't even gotten to the creator part yet. When we look at things like this, all we're looking at is the footprint of who God is. We're not looking at God. We're just looking at what he's left behind when he ran through. You know what I'm saying? Like, whoa, somebody just came. There are billions and billions and billions of stars right here in our neighborhood. That's just because God was around. Absolutely amazing. I am taken aback. Here at Elements Church, we really do dig in a lot on the covenant side of God, right? The relationship, the intimacy. And when Jesus says, pray like this, and he starts it off with Abba, which is the Aramaic word for daddy. It's not even father, it's daddy. I mean, there's intimacy and relationship. And without the relationship, there's no covenant. And without the covenant, there's no salvation, there's no God, there's no nothing, for us. But sometimes it's nice to just take it back a notch, just zoom out and remind ourselves too of the kingdom side of God. When we talk about kingdom, we think of how he's not just our father, he's the king of everything. And I typically think, oh, everything, right, the heavens and the earth. When I look at that and think of how he's the head of all that stuff, it means a whole lot more to me. And I think, my dad is awesome. Oh my goodness, what? We get to call this God Father? Ridiculous. I'm going to quote A.W. Tozer's The Knowledge of the Holy like crazy tonight. So pretty much every quote you hear is going to be from this book because I read it every year, and that's because I tend to lean toward the covenant side of God more often. The intimacy side, he's sitting with me in the room. He sits and cries with me, I believe, when I'm mourning. He encourages me every day. Several years ago now, I will never forget this one birthday that really stunk. We were driving, we were raising money, so we were driving. These guys know, they're missionaries. So we're driving all night and all day, and Eric's parents were going through something at the time, and he was talking to one of them for hours and hours and hours, and it was my birthday. So I was like, really? This is my birthday today. I just get to sit in the car and listen to somebody else gripe, and this is all we get to do. And I remember by the end of the day, 3 things. I got a chai latte, which was life-changing. To me, they just are. The sunset that day was unbelievable, and we saw deer. And I remember going to bed that night thinking, this was a perfect birthday. God, in the smallest ways, came through, right? Like, that's stuff that we need to remember about God. He really does care. Like, for some reason, he sees us in the midst of everything that we just saw, and he actually cares. But it would not be good for me to assume that that's all he does and all he cares about, and he is kind of at my beck and call to sort of swoop in and take care of every little thought and interest and passion I have at any time, because he is also the God of all that. So I'm gonna be quoting some things here from the Knowledge of the Holy, and I hope it's encouraging and empowering, and by the time you leave, you're like, whoa, that's God. Sweet. Secularism, materialism, and the intrusive presence of things have put out the light in our souls and turned us into a generation of zombies. Whew, A.W. Dang. We cover our deep ignorance with words, but we are ashamed to wonder. We are afraid to whisper mystery. He says, to regain her lost power, the church must see heaven opened and have a transforming vision of God. Do we want to regain our lost power? I do. Then we have to see God as he is. It is impossible to keep our moral practices sound and our inward attitudes right, while our idea of God is erroneous or inadequate. If we would bring back spiritual power to our lives, we must begin to think of God more nearly as he is. Our morality, our attitudes, all the things that we're trying to do daily, the way that we're trying to step out into kingdom stuff and see God's power and miracles and all of that stuff is wrapped up into how do we see God. If we don't see him as he is, we're always going to fall short. And he says that's not just a big bummer. The essence of idolatry is the entertainment of thoughts about God that are unworthy of him. Think about that for a second. Idolatry. You know what idolatry is? Worshiping a different God than ours. And the idea is that we could actually think the whole time that we're worshiping God, and instead we're worshiping this manageable, wimpy, pathetic little thing that's sitting in the corner just hoping and pleading that maybe Leila will spend 5 minutes with me today. That is not God. I mean, he's gracious, he loves us, he reaches out to us, but he's not this thing that we've created him to be. In contemporary Christianity, where there's no wonder, there's no awe, there's no fear, right? I don't go throughout my day thinking, I wonder how many galaxies God just bumped into today and decided he'd do things with, and raise up nations and set down others and all the stuff that he does in our world. I mean, I don't know what's out, you know what I'm saying? I'm just guessing. I mean, who knows what he's up to? And I'm whining half the time because I didn't get, they made my chai latte out of soy instead of out of 2% or whatever. I mean, God is big. He's got a lot in his mind. He's got a lot to do, and for some reason he cares about us, but it's great that he cares about us, but I don't want to be an idolater because I've come to think of God as something other than what he is. So it's not just a matter of our faith suffering a little or not accomplishing everything he has for us. It's bad. Nothing will ever move forward without us knowing and seeing God more nearly as he is. And why do we make him small? Why do we try to make him small and manageable? He says elsewhere, we try to put God in a manageable place, or at least we try to make sure we know where he is when we need him. That God that made all that is not manageable. He's not on call for us whenever we decide we're going to just well, I guess right now I've got maybe a little bit for you here. Maybe I won't give up that thing. but maybe I'll kind of start to, okay, God, where'd you go? I'm ready for you now. He says, the philosopher and the scientist will admit that there is much they do not know. But that is quite another thing from admitting that there is something which they can never know, which indeed they have no technique for discovering. To admit that there is one who lies beyond us, who exists outside of all of our categories, who will not be dismissed with the name, who will not appear before the bar of our reason, nor submit to our curious inquiries, this requires a great deal of humility, more than most of us possess, so we save face by thinking God down to our level. We think, I saw somebody be compassionate today, so God must be like that, but a bunch more. I've tried to love somebody, so God is probably way, way more loving than me, but let's just multiply it times 40,000 billion, when the reality is, he is nothing actually really that much like us. Because we're created, and he's not. Because he's God, and we're not. Because he is completely and entirely other. The only being who has ever been and ever will be self-sufficient. We are dependent on him for everything. I mean, I was reading up on rogue planets. I mean, there's this thing with rogue planets that have been knocked out of their orbit. They're just roaming around the universe, and at any point, one could just, we'd probably see it coming, right? But they just come out of nowhere and knock us out of orbit, and bye-bye sun. I mean, there's a bunch of them. You just think about things like that, and you're like, that's God. God made all that. And meanwhile, we are satisfied with this teeny tiny little thing. Why do we do that to him? I think it frightens us to think there's someone like God out there. We can never really wrap our heads around him, so we think him down to where we can understand him because we are so unbelievably obsessed with ourselves. And so if we can make him like us, okay, now I'm okay. But to allow him to be who he is, which, believe me, we will never be able to grasp. Even being able to grasp what he has revealed about himself to us is going to take eternity. But God is self-sufficient. I am dependent upon the sun and the weather and 1,000 different tiny little microclimates not going wrong on this planet, right? We're dependent on rogue planets not coming out of nowhere and knocking us around. God is dependent on nothing and nobody, and he never will be. That's awesome. Psalm 92 says, before the mountains were born, before you gave birth to the earth and the world, from beginning to end, you are God. I love that change in tense. Before all these things happened, and thinking about all these things that will happen, you are God because he spans all of it. Barnes' commentary on that last part, that you are God, he says, the idea is that he was always and ever will be God. The true God, the only God, the unchangeable God. At any period in the past, during the existence of the earth or the heavens, or before it was formed, he existed, with all the attributes essential to deity. So he always has been everything that he is now and ever will be. At any point in the future, during the existence of the earth and the heavens or beyond, far as the mind can reach into the future, and even beyond that, he will still exist unchanged with all the attributes of deity. He's still going to be who he is now and who he's always been. Unchanged. The creation of the universe made no change in him. Because he made us, he didn't change because of that. We changed. Its destruction would not vary the mode of his existence or make him in any respect a different being. There could not be a more absolute and unambiguous declaration, as there could not be one more sublime, of the eternity of God. And also probably not unable to be understood as the eternity of God. The mind cannot take in a grander thought than that there is one eternal and immutable being. Immutable means unchangeable. That is really hard for us to understand, right? It's almost even hard for us to value, if you think about it, that God never changes. Because to us, a very high value that I have in my life is change for the better, right? That next week I will be different than I am this week in a good direction. That in 5 years I will be a different person in some ways than I am now because I've traveled toward God more and I've become more like him. But part of the problem with the way we think of change is time. We live in time. So when we're different than we were before, it kind of makes sense. But God doesn't live in time. He's beyond that. In fact, C.S. Lewis to illustrate eternity and how God is eternal, he put a flat sheet of paper down. He said, imagine this sheet of paper infinitely extended in every direction, and that's eternity. And then draw a little line on the paper, and that's time. Is that blowing your mind? It should be, because we can't get it. You know what I'm saying? If you come away with one thing from this sermon, it's we don't know much, and God is really good to us. This tiny little sliver is time. God dwells in eternity, but time dwells in God. And we are here. You know, do you guys ever see the movie Arrival? I love that movie. I really need to watch it a bunch more, because every time I watch it, something else stands out to me, and I get another sermon illustration. Who has seen it? I'm curious. The hands. I don't want to spoil it for you. I won't tell you what happens. It's an alien movie, but it's a very different sort of alien movie. And the idea is that these aliens arrive, and they're trying to communicate with human beings. And so they go get a linguist to try to translate. She figures out early on the verbal language, she's not going to get anywhere with that, but their written language, maybe she can understand. And their written language is not like ours or like any that is on this planet. It doesn't go up to down. It doesn't go left to right. It doesn't go in any direction that encapsulates time. See, the way that we write is like capitalize the first letter and put a period or an exclamation point or a question mark at the end, right? And other cultures on this planet do it differently, which says something about their culture, but it's all within the constraints of time and how we see time. They speak in terms of a circle, infinite. Because the way they think and the way they operate is infinite. They're not constrained by time. And so there's like these blotches, kind of ink blotches on it that give concepts, and that's their language. So, I mean, even if you think about the fact of what that tells us, about the way we think, that everything is a beginning and an end, and the ending is after the beginning, right? Chronologically, everything comes after something else. I'm not sure we'll ever be able to truly understand outside of that. There's this book, I haven't read it yet, but I watched this little cartoon version of it the other day, called Flatland. I'm going to assume none of you have read it, because it's from the 30s, and it's very different, and I don't even know how I interacted with it. But the idea of it is that there's this land called Flatland, and all of the people in it are two-dimensional. They're squares or they're circles, and they can't imagine that anything beyond that ever exists. And one day, a sphere comes to visit Flatland. Of course, they can only see the sphere as a circle, because that's all they have the ability to see. And he goes about trying to convince them that there are 3 dimensions and all this stuff, and it's kind of this war and all this stuff. But, I mean, imagine that's kind of what we're trying to do when we look at God. We are like these 2-dimensional beings who can't even conceive of something else, trying to see him as he is, and we're not going to be able to fully do it. I mean, really, it's grace of God that we can even see any of him, right? Absolutely unbelievable. When I watched that movie, it's not like I came away from it like, oh, now I get God. It was like, oh, I'm never going to get this. Whoa, that just kind of blew my mind. And that's just like created beings. You're talking about a creator who had no beginning and no end. That God appears at times beginning is not too difficult to comprehend. But that he appears at the beginning and end of time simultaneously is not so easy to grasp. Yet it's true. I mean, he is outside of all of it. That's why he doesn't change. It's why he will never learn. He will never discover something new. He will never be anything other than what he is now, because he's always been that and he will always be that. And we are never going to change him. Isn't that awesome? Like, there is something in the universe, in the whatever, I want to say the world, but clearly it's beyond that no matter what I do, it's not going to change him. He loves us because he's good. And he's love, not because he's loving, but because he actually is love, right? He is the thing that is love that we get little glimpses of and say, oh, that's love. He is the origin and the source of all of it. It's really good to know that he's not going to be somebody different. That I'm never going to look at him like I would look at a person and say, wow, I'm really glad to see that growth there. Never. He's never going to grow. He's always the same. He's amazing. I'm sorry, I feel like I'm going to come out of my skin. But really, when I'm talking about this, I'm just trying to download it. I'm like, it has been days and days now of this ridiculous, like, holy God is awesome. You know what I'm saying? I remember being a young child, like Aspen's age, and someone trying to explain to me that God never was born or created, that he never started. And I specifically remember looking down. This is weird that I have this vivid memory, because I never remember anything like this. Like, I'm notoriously bad at remembering things like this in my family. And I remember looking down, I had a hairbrush in my hand. And my little 5 or 6 year old brain tried to understand This hairbrush was made, but one day it won't be. But God isn't like that. You know what I'm saying? Like, I mean, come on. Like, how much further have we really gotten than that? Now I'm 38, and I'm still like, that's why think about the doctrine of the Trinity. There will never be an illustration or a metaphor that can really completely explain to people how this God is one, but three persons, and it's just ridiculous. Now do you kind of see why? Like, wouldn't it be super disappointing if we could explain some of these things about God in full? Like, why is it that people sit around and be like, well, if I can't explain it, I won't believe it? It's like, why would you ever want to believe in something that you can explain? I want to believe in the God that made all that just by speaking. And believe me, the more you study, I can never understand how scientists can be atheists. What they're doing is discovering what God's made. It's not like they're ever in opposition if they're truly done right. But I mean, how can you study things like that? And the way things are formed and come into being. And remember, when something is 100,000 light years away, you know what that means, right? We are seeing something that was there 100,000 years ago, not what's there today. It took 100,000 years for the light to travel, and that's not very far in our universe, right? So who knows? Whatever's happening today in that place, somebody will see 100,000 years from now. It's just crazy. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's just crazy stuff that this kind of God loves us. In Psalm 94, it says, for you, 1,000 years are as a passing day, as brief as a few night hours. You know why? Because he's not constrained by time. Because he's infinite, and he's eternal, and he's other. Tozer says, our concepts of measurement embrace mountains and men, atoms and stars, gravity, energy, numbers, speed, but never God. We cannot speak of measure or amount or size or weight and at the same time be speaking of God, for these tell of degrees, and there are no degrees in God. All that he is without growth or addition or development. Nothing in God is less or more or large or small. He is what he is in himself without qualifying thought or word. He is simply God. That's cool. Isaiah 66, 1-2. This is what the Lord says. Heaven is my throne and the earth is my footstool. That's cool. Except it's a lot bigger than that, isn't it? Now I'm like, oh, our heaven and earth, but what do you do with all the other ones? Heaven is my throne, the earth is my footstool. Could you build me a temple as good as that? Could you build me such a resting place? My hands have made both heaven and earth. They and everything in them are mine. I, the Lord, have spoken. This is where he's trying to point out to people how ridiculous it is that God could ever live in a house or a temple. That kind of God is not probably going to show up and reside in this little thing that we've just built for him. We are the temple of God, though. Isn't that crazy? Psalm 135:6 says, the Lord does whatever pleases him throughout all heaven and earth and on the seas and in their depths. And you know what? I'm super glad. I'm super glad I'm not him. I'm super glad nothing that I think should be is what he actually does, because I don't get that much. In the knowledge of the holy, when he talks about justice, because he goes through all the attributes of God, this will forever blow my mind. He says, when people say that something's not fair, they're judging God, who is justice. Okay? So God sets the tone for justice. There's never a time that God can't be just, because he is justice, right? And so everything, as we're measuring whether it's just or fair, has to be lined up to him. So he can never be judged. And yet we do it daily, don't we? God, that's not right. God, that's not fair. God, hey, I've been through crap. You know what I'm saying? But still, he is justice. So when we come to him, when we come to that God and say, this is my thing, it's fine. He's not insecure, you know? God is not insecure. He can handle our full-on emotion, our full-on fear, our full-on anger. He can handle it. But once it turns to judgment of him, we're kind of treading on soil that's like, what? We're going to judge that God? He's so patient. We're probably never really going to understand him, which is good. Because if we could understand him, I just don't think he'd be God. Tozer says, the human mind being created has an understandable uneasiness about the uncreated. We do not find it comfortable to allow for the presence of one who is wholly outside of the circle of our familiar knowledge. We tend to be disquieted by the thought of one who does not account to us for his being, who is responsible to no one, who is self-existent, self-dependent, and self-sufficient. Well, no, God, you really need to show up and tell me why you did this. Why do bad things happen to good people? Let's get God in that chair, and all of us surround him and question him and judge him and make him come to account. And guess what? He doesn't. He doesn't hold himself accountable to us. And it drives us crazy because it makes us helpless. And we're control freaks, right? Why do we need to have wonder? What is the point of all this? Number one, to give us peace. Because at the end of the day, there is a being out there who will never change, and he will never be disappointed in me, because guess what? He kind of already knew what was going to happen before it happened. He'll never be wounded by me, at least not in the way that detracts anything from who he is. He'll never be different tomorrow than what he says he is today. He will always be. And that brings to me peace, especially in a world where there's not a whole lot that doesn't change, and often in the wrong direction. There's a lot of peace in that. Why else do we need to be consumed with wonder? To keep us holy. Tozer says, when men and women no longer fear God, they transgress his laws without hesitation. The fear of consequences is not a deterrent when the fear of God is gone. In the olden days, men of faith were said to walk in the fear of God and to serve the Lord with fear. However intimate their communion with God, however bold their prayers, at the base of their religious life was the conception of God as awesome and dreadful. This idea of God transcendent runs through the whole Bible and gives color and tone to the character of the saints. This fear of God was more than a natural apprehension of danger. It was a non-rational dread, an acute feeling of personal insufficiency in the presence of God Almighty. Think about every time someone comes in the presence of God in the Bible. They are on their face, terrified. And not the kind of fear that we have that's earthly that makes us think like, oh, there's some danger coming or something. Not that kind of fear. The kind of fear that makes us think, how did I get here? And why did I ask to be here? Seriously. When Moses is like, show me your glory, we're always like, be confident, but that's before he saw God. You know what I'm saying? And just the teeny little bit that he let him see. Just the teeny little bit that he let him see. I mean, people were kind of overcome, right? Every time they even saw a vision, there were words like, it was like sapphire, it was like water, it was like this. Like there's nothing that we can comprehend on this planet that is really that much like him. And the fear of God has to be in us. When we see that kind of God, we need to remember, Jesus is not just our homeboy. He's also the one who created all that. And third, to stir our faith. Matthew 19:26 says, Jesus looked at them intently and said, humanly speaking, it is impossible, but with God, everything is possible. Now, I can quote that to myself all the time, but when I think of God in the context of what we're talking about tonight, and then I think, oh yeah, it's possible. When we're like sometimes, oh, I have the sniffles. I think God could take care of my sniffles. Sure, that's not too hard for God. I mean, all the other stuff is way too hard for him, but maybe he could possibly take away my sniffles because that's really low and easy. And we need to give God these like lobs, right? We need to like lob him stuff because if I hit something too hard toward him, he's just not powerful enough to do it. We don't talk like that, but we live like that, right? To stir our faith. God is big. God is awesome. And the more we live in wonder of him, everything will come into focus. Our faith, our life, our witness, our peace.